My name is Vanessa Gonzalez. I'm 37 years old, a construction engineer living in California. I've spent most of my life building things: bridges, foundations, projects with timelines and budgets and safety protocols so strict they can feel like a cage. But the truth is, I like cages when they're built for protection, because the only thing I've ever truly been afraid of is the one thing I can't blueprint into safety: my son. Mason is 11 now. Green eyes that don't belong to me, those came from his dad, and a smile that can erase a whole day of exhaustion in 1 second if I'm lucky enough to see it. He's taller than he used to be, quieter too, like something in him grew up early. And if you ask me when that happened, when my child stopped being carefree, my mind doesn't drift to a year or a season. It goes straight to a Saturday morning in March, 4 years ago. Back then, Mason was 7. Still small enough that his shoes lit up when he ran. Still the kind of kid who believed adults meant safety just because they were adults. I used to believe that too. My boyfriend, Ethan Reed, was 35 then. Brilliant with numbers, sharp with people, the kind of financial specialist who could walk into a room full of executives and make them feel like they were the ones catching up. He's logical, calm under pressure, and I've always admired that about him. We'd been together 12 years. Not a single day of those 12 years goes by in my memory without me feeling grateful he was beside me, steady, clear-eyed, the voice that said, "We can handle this." And then Mason came along, and my whole world narrowed down into one simple promise I made in the hospital, staring at a tiny face and a fist the size of my thumb. "No one will ever hurt you, not while I'm breathing." I thought love was enough to keep that promise. I didn't realize sometimes you have to go to war to keep it. That Saturday, the sky was gray and the air had that half-hearted spring chill. California does so well, cold enough to make you want to stay under the covers, not cold enough to justify it. Mason was home from school for the weekend, but Ethan and I both had morning meetings we couldn't miss. So we did what we'd done before. We drove Mason to my parents' house. My mom lived 10 miles away, 15 minutes by car, close enough that I told myself, if anything happens, we're right there. When I pulled up, my mom came out fast, like she'd been watching from the window. She looked surprised to see us so early, until her eyes landed on Mason. Her face lit up. "Oh, sweetheart," she cooed, opening her arms. "Come here, Grandma missed you." Mason ran into her hug like he always did. Like the world was still simple. Like grandparents were automatic warmth. I got straight to the point, because time was already snapping at my heels. "Mom, I've got a meeting. Can you watch Mason for the morning?" She nodded immediately, no questions asked. Her hand ruffled Mason's hair, and she smiled like she was offering him a prize. "Later, we'll go to the store," she said. "Want cookies and grape yogurt?" Mason's eyes went wide, bright with joy. "Grandma, you're the best!" I remember smiling, not because it was funny, because it was comforting. That scene gave me peace. It made me think, at least my parents can show up for my son, even if they never really showed up for me. We weren't close, my parents and I, but they were still his grandparents. So I left. I didn't know that within hours I'd be staring at my phone like it was a bomb, and realizing my parents weren't just careless. They were dangerous. At the office, I was in a conference room at 8:00 a.m., presenting progress on phase 2 of a project. Everyone was focused. My slides were on page 8 when my phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. I hit decline and kept talking. 30 seconds later, it buzzed again. Same number. Mr. Hudson, the oldest board member, glanced up at me. "Vanessa, take it. Sounds urgent." My stomach tightened. I nodded, forced a professional smile, and stepped out into the hallway. "Hello?" A woman's voice came through, clear, controlled, but edged with concern. "Hi, is this Ms. Vanessa Gonzalez?" "Yes. I'm calling from Crescent Market. Your son, Mason, is currently in the security office. He was found alone in the store, crying. He said he was lost, but he remembered your phone number." For a second, my body forgot how to function. The hallway blurred. My fingers went cold around the phone. My brain went blank, like someone had hit a switch. "Ma'am?" the woman asked carefully. "Can you hear me?" I swallowed hard. Yes, I'm here. I'm on my way. Please stay with him." The moment I hung up, I called my mother. She picked up after a few rings. I didn't say hello. I didn't breathe. "Mom, Crescent Market just called. Mason's lost. He's at the security office. What happened? Where are you? Where's Dad?" And my mother, calm as if I'd asked what she wanted for dinner, said, "He called you. Smart kid. Didn't let us down." My throat burned. What the hell are you talking about? Her tone sharpened, like I was the unreasonable one. We were trying to help you two out, Vanessa. Don't blow this out of proportion. I hung up. I didn't give her another second to poison my ears. I walked back into the meeting room, heart slamming against my ribs. Everyone looked up, waiting for me to continue. I stood at the door and said, I'm sorry. My son is in trouble. He's lost at a supermarket. I have to go. No one stopped me. Mr. Hudson stood and gave a single nod. Go. Family comes first. I nodded back and I ran. On the way to my car, I called Ethan. He didn't answer the first time. The second time, he picked up. I spoke so fast I could barely hear my own voice. Mason's lost at Crescent Market. I'm heading there now. Please, if you can, come. His voice turned sharp and immediate. I'm going. Stay on the line if you need me. I drove like the road was a straight line between life and death. Because when your child is missing, even for minutes, your mind doesn't imagine one worst case. It imagines all of them. When I arrived, I didn't even remember parking. I rushed inside, asked the greeter where security was, and followed her finger like it was the only direction left in the world. The moment I pushed that door open, I saw him. Mason was curled in a chair too big for him, clutching a small stuffed bear someone had handed him. His face was flushed. His eyes were swollen from crying. The second he saw me, he launched himself off the chair and ran into my arms like I was the only safe place left on earth. I dropped to my knees and wrapped him up so tight I felt his little ribs expand with every shaky breath. I'm here, I whispered, voice trembling despite my efforts. I'm here, baby. Mommy's here. He couldn't speak. He just sobbed into my shoulder, shaking like a leaf caught in wind. And in that moment, something inside me went ice cold. Because a child doesn't shake like that from being lost. A child shakes like that from being left. 10 minutes later, Ethan burst in. The second he saw Mason, his face cracked. Just for a flash, before he pulled it together and knelt beside us. Buddy, he whispered, one hand rubbing Mason's back, like he was trying to soothe something he couldn't touch. You're okay. We've got you. A security guard, older, steady, professional, explained what happened. A shopper found Mason alone near the candy aisle, terrified. No adult in sight. They brought him in, calmed him down, and Mason recited our names and phone numbers. As the man spoke, I kept one hand on my son, like if I let go, the world might swallow him again. I thanked every staff member, over and over. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Then we drove straight to Mason's pediatrician. No appointment, no hesitation. Because even after you find your child, you still don't feel safe. Dr. David examined Mason and told us what my heart already knew. No physical injuries, he said gently, but emotionally. He may be jumpy. Nightmares, trouble sleeping, loud sounds might scare him. The most important thing is this: don't leave him alone, not even for a few minutes. Ethan's hand tightened around mine so hard it almost hurt. I nodded, jaw clenched. Understood. We didn't talk much driving to my parents' house, but I felt it in the silence, thick, heavy, full of things we didn't want to say out loud. Because if we said them, they'd become real in a way we couldn't undo. When we got there, I rang the doorbell twice. My mother opened the door like this was a celebration. Her face lit up, arms wide. Mason, Grandma is so proud of you. Like he'd won a trophy. Like the prize was surviving what she did. Mason didn't step forward. He stepped back, half a step, and pressed himself against Ethan's side, hiding his face like my mother was a stranger. My mother froze, smile flickering. And I stayed on the doorstep, voice steady only because rage was holding it up like a spine. Tell me, I said slowly, why you left a 7-year-old alone in a supermarket. My mother's expression hardened. We were trying to help you. We wanted Mason to be tougher. I felt my breath turn sharp. Tougher? Do you know how often kids get taken, in broad daylight, in public places? She crossed her arms. When you were little, we let you go places alone, and you turned out fine. And then my father appeared behind her, coffee mug in hand, eyes already cold. He stepped into the doorway like he owned the air. You're standing here lecturing me, Vanessa, he said, voice low and threatening, talking down to the people who raised you? I didn't flinch. You abandoned my child. My father's mouth twisted. He's a boy. Boys need to toughen up. What happened today was a lesson. That line hit like a slap. I stared at him, and something inside me, something old, woke up. Because suddenly, I wasn't just looking at my father as Mason's grandfather. I was looking at him as the man who raised me to swallow pain and call it character. I spoke through clenched teeth. Mason is 7. He's not a man in the making. He's a child. My father lifted his brows with pure contempt. But he made it, didn't he? He He remembered your number. That's a win. You should be thanking us. I let out a dry laugh that didn't sound like me. You're lucky, I said quietly, that I haven't reported you for child endangerment. Silence dropped. Then my father's face twisted with fury. Get the hell out of my house and don't come back. I met his glare without blinking. Fine, I said, voice low but absolute. I'll press charges. We'll let the law decide. He slammed the door so hard the frame shuddered. No goodbye. No apology. Nothing. Mason clung tighter to Ethan, and Ethan lifted him into his arms without a word. We walked away from that house like we were leaving a place that no longer deserved to be called family. And that night, Mason didn't sleep alone. Neither did we. Because when a child wakes up crying at 2 o'clock a.m., shaking from nightmares that feel too real, you realize the worst thing your parents took from him wasn't one morning in a supermarket. It was his belief that adults will come back. And as I held my son in the dark, I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. This wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Mason sat at the kitchen table with his cereal untouched, spoon resting in the bowl like he'd forgotten what it was for. His shoulders were too tense for a child. Every time the refrigerator motor clicked on, his head jerked up like he was bracing for something. Ethan tried to keep things normal. Soft voice, gentle questions, little jokes that usually earned at least a smile. But even he kept glancing at Mason the way you look at a cracked windshield, hoping it won't splinter further. And me? I walked around with my chest tight and my jaw clenched, like if I loosened even for 1 second, I'd fall apart right there on the kitchen floor. Because Dr. David's words were still echoing in my head. Don't leave him alone, not even for a few minutes. That warning wasn't just medical advice, it was an accusation. It meant someone already proved they can't be trusted. And it meant you're the only shield he has left. I kept replaying the moment my mother said, "Smart kid, didn't let us down, didn't let them down," as if my son's terror had been a test he passed for their approval. That night, I barely slept. Every time Mason shifted in his bed, I was awake. Every time he whimpered, my heart jumped into my throat. At around 2:30 a.m., Ethan whispered in the darkness, "Vanessa, what are we going to do?" I didn't answer him right away, because the truth was, I already knew what I wanted to do. I just didn't know if I was ready to survive what came after. People love to say, but they're your parents. They say it like it's a spell that cancels out harm. Like blood is a shield. Like the word family has ever stopped a child from shaking in fear. By morning, I was sitting at the kitchen counter with my phone in my hand, staring at a name in my contacts like it was the edge of a cliff. Frank Delgado. Frank had been my friend for years. A lawyer who specialized in child protection cases, custody disputes, neglect reports, endangerment. The kind of man who didn't raise his voice but could still make a courtroom go quiet with one sentence. At 7:30 a.m., I hit call. He answered after a few rings, voice rough with sleep. "Vanessa, you okay?" "No," my voice came out hoarse. "Frank, I need your help." There was a pause, the kind that happens when someone hears the word help and stops being a friend for a moment, becomes something more serious. "Tell me," he said. "Everything. Start from the beginning." So I did. I told him about dropping Mason off at my parents' house, the promised cookies, the supermarket call, my mother's calm voice, my father's line, the slammed door, the nightmares. When I finished, the line was silent for a beat. Then Frank exhaled, slow. "That's child endangerment," he said bluntly. "Not a parenting style, not discipline, endangerment." My stomach twisted. Even hearing the words out loud made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. Under California law, he continued, abandoning a minor in a public place, especially in a way that causes emotional harm, can absolutely be grounds for action. Depending on investigation findings, it can go civil or criminal. I swallowed. So what do I do? Frank didn't hesitate. "You file," he said. "Not to punish them, to protect Mason, and to make sure your parents and anyone else watching never thinks this is acceptable again." I stared at the wall, knuckles white around the phone, because Frank's words weren't dramatic. They were clinical, and that made them terrifying. It meant this wasn't just my feelings. It meant a line had been crossed that the law recognized. I asked the question that had been chewing through my chest since yesterday. "If I file, does that mean I'm ending my relationship with my parents forever?" Frank's voice softened slightly. "Vanessa, your parents ended the relationship the moment they chose pride over your child's safety. You're just responding." I hung up an hour later with an appointment set for 2 p.m. at his office. Ethan didn't try to stop me. He just watched me pack Mason's backpack with snacks and a small toy, like we were going somewhere normal, like we weren't dragging our family into something that would scar every holiday and birthday from here on out. When Frank opened the door to his office, he didn't offer coffee. He didn't ask how work was. He didn't do polite. He pointed to the chair across from his desk. "Sit," he said. "Tell me the details again. Every minute matters." So I did, again. And this time, Frank took notes like he was building a case the way I built bridges, measuring the load, checking the weak points, preparing for collapse. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Here's the truth you need to hear." I braced myself. "Your parents will say it was a lesson. They'll say you're soft. They'll say Mason is fine because nothing happened." Frank tapped his pen against the paper. "But the law doesn't wait for a tragedy. The law exists to prevent one." My throat tightened. "So, should I press charges?" Frank looked me straight in the eye. "Yes," he said, "and you're going to feel guilty for doing the right thing. That's how people like your parents stay powerful, because they taught you that protecting yourself is disrespect." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just nodded. "Then let's do it," I said. 2 days later, Frank filed the formal complaint with the district attorney's office in our county. He told me I likely wouldn't need to appear in court immediately, that the case would begin with an investigation. But he also warned me, because this involved a child, it could move on 2 tracks, administrative and criminal, depending on severity and cooperation. 3 days after the paperwork went in, I got a call. District Attorney's Office. An investigator named Megan wanted to meet with me and Mason. When I pictured a DA investigator, I imagined someone cold. Clipboard, sharp eyes, impatient voice. Megan wasn't like that. She met us in a small, sunlit room, toys neatly arranged in the corner, like someone had gone out of their way to make it less frightening. She didn't start with questions. She started with a story, something about a fire truck she once saw that had a ladder so tall it looked like it touched the clouds. Mason liked fire trucks. Within 10 minutes, he was answering her softly. And when she asked about the supermarket, his hands began twisting in his lap. His words got stuck. I watched my son's face change, the way a child's face changes when they're forced back into a moment they didn't survive emotionally. Megan didn't rush him. She waited. She nodded gently. And when Mason finally whispered, "I couldn't find Grandma, and I thought maybe she left me forever," something flickered in Megan's eyes. Not anger, recognition. Like she'd heard this kind of sentence before, and it never got easier. She turned to me and said quietly, "I'm going to document this fully." After the session, Frank and I spoke to Megan privately. She explained the process. They'd request supermarket security footage, employee statements, witness accounts, and medical records from Dr. David if needed. Everything would be reviewed. Everything would be checked. And for the first time since this started, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Not peace, but support. That afternoon, Frank called with an update. The DA accepted the case, he said. They're proceeding with administrative action. Your parents will be ordered to complete mandatory child safety and psychological education. There will also be restrictions. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to feel relief. But another part, the part that still heard my father's voice, boys need to toughen up, knew my parents weren't going to take this quietly. Frank continued, Megan also made it clear, if your parents don't cooperate, or if there's any repeat behavior, it can escalate immediately. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Good. I didn't want my parents in prison. That wasn't my goal. My goal was simple. Never again. Not to Mason. Not to any child in that family. But then, Wednesday morning, 4 days after leaving Frank's office, my phone rang. Dad. My stomach dropped, but I answered. I didn't even get the chance to say hello. You filed charges against your own parents, he spat. You ungrateful. I cut in, voice steady. You dared me to. You and Mom both did. His breath hissed through the phone. I said that in the heat of the moment. And I'm doing this because you still don't understand what you did, I replied. If you truly believe abandoning a 7-year-old is acceptable, then this is exactly why it has to go through the system. He started to speak again, but I hung up. I didn't argue, because arguing was what they wanted. Arguing was their home turf. What came next was worse. The messages started rolling in like a storm. My aunt. Is this how you treat your parents? You're shaming the family. My cousin. It wasn't even that serious. You're so dramatic. A voice note from someone I hadn't talked to in years. Screaming, cursing, calling me a monster. And the sick part? They weren't asking if Mason was okay. Not one message said, how's the child? Not one. It was all about my parents. Their reputation. Their pride. Their comfort. I listened to every voice note. I read every message. And then I blocked them one by one. Ethan watched silently from across the room. When I finished, he walked over, placed his hand over mine, and said, "You're not alone." But even with him there, it still felt like I was standing in the middle of a burning building while everyone yelled at me for using water. The next day, I met Frank again. He opened his laptop and pulled up a new file. "The preliminary investigation is complete," he said. My heart thudded. "Already?" "They moved fast," Frank said. "Security footage, doctor's report, your recorded confrontation at the house." "Yes, Vanessa, that was smart." His eyes lifted to mine. "It's all enough." I frowned. "Enough for what?" Frank's expression sharpened. "They're not settling for a civil penalty," he said. "They're taking it to court." The air seemed to change. "What does that mean?" I asked, even though I already knew. "It means a public trial," Frank said. "A judge, documentation, permanent record. If convicted, your parents could face fines, mandatory programs, and the file will be marked with endangering a minor." My mouth went dry. A courtroom. My parents on the defense side. My son as the reason. My entire family watching like it's entertainment. And then a thought, cold, clear, slid into place. I leaned back in the chair and asked, "Can outsiders attend?" Frank blinked, surprised. "It's public court," he said slowly. "Anyone can." I nodded. A faint, bitter calm settled over me. "Good," I said. "I'll invite them all." Frank stared at me for a long second. Not with judgment. With something quieter. Something like respect. 2 days before the trial, I did one thing. I opened my contacts and scrolled. Aunt Cheryl, Uncle Marcus, Uncle Brad, cousins. People who had condemned me with their texts like they were moral judges. I messaged every single one. Short, calm, no emotion. "Court this Thursday at 9 a.m. at the county courthouse. It's public. If family means something to you, come listen." No one replied that night, but I knew they read it. Because when Thursday morning came, they were already there, outside the courthouse. 10 minutes before we arrived. My mother in black, face flushed red with fury. My father with arms crossed, jaw tight, looking like he was ready to swing at anyone who dared meet his eyes. And behind them, almost everyone I invited, grouped together like it was a reunion, whispering like it was gossip. As soon as I stepped out of the car with Ethan and Mason, the murmurs started. My mother stormed toward me, pointing in my face. "You're not even ashamed," she hissed, "dragging your child here to sue his grandparents." Before I could respond, my aunt cut in, loud enough for people passing by to hear. "Do you even have a heart?" Uncle Brad's voice boomed over them all. "Kids these days are so soft, you're doing this over a few harsh words." Mason's fingers tightened around Ethan's hand. I looked down at my son, his face pale, eyes wide, trying to be brave. And in that moment, I understood something with painful clarity. Victory wasn't going to happen on those courthouse steps. Not with arguments, not with yelling, not with convincing anyone. Victory was going to come from one thing they feared more than me. The truth spoken out loud under oath. I turned away from them. I didn't say a single word. I took my son and my boyfriend and walked through the courthouse doors. And behind us, the whispers followed. Because everyone wanted to see if I would break. They didn't understand. I broke the moment Mason cried alone in that supermarket. What walked into that courthouse wasn't the daughter they could bully into silence. It was a mother who had nothing left to lose. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real. About 30 seats total, and somehow, every single one of them filled. Ethan sat beside me on the plaintiff's side, his knee angled slightly toward mine, like a quiet reminder that I wasn't standing alone. Mason sat just behind us, small hands folded in his lap, shoulders drawn in. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. He knew this room mattered. Across the aisle, my parents entered first. My father wore a crisp white shirt and a dark blue tie, the kind he reserved for church holidays and funerals. His face was carved from stone, no softness, no doubt. My mother followed in dark clothes, lips pressed thin, eyes scanning the room like she was walking into a public execution rather than a legal hearing. And behind them, almost every relative who had called me heartless. They took their seats one by one. Aunt Cheryl, Uncle Brad, Uncle Marcus, cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years except to condemn me through text messages. They sat upright, eyes fixed forward. No whispers now. At exactly 9 a.m., the judge entered. She was a woman in her 50s, hair neatly tied back, glasses perched low on her nose. Her voice was calm, firm, and utterly uninterested in family politics. After confirming identities, she began reading from the file. The defendants, Mr. George McKay and Mrs. Linda McKay, are charged with violating Section 273A of the California Penal Code, willful endangerment of the physical and mental well-being of a minor. The air changed. I didn't turn around, but I felt it. The collective shift behind me. The moment the word endangerment landed. The judge continued, her tone steady and precise. The allegation includes the abandonment of their grandson, Mason, at Crescent Market on the morning of March 12th, without supervision, for a duration exceeding 40 minutes. 40 minutes. I swallowed, because until that moment, I hadn't let myself think about the time. How long fear had sat with my child before help arrived. The prosecutor stood and began laying out the facts, one piece at a time, like assembling something no one could deny once it was whole. A statement from the supermarket clerk, a middle-aged woman dropping off a child and leaving alone. Testimony from the security guard. Mason found crying near the candy aisle, trembling. No adult in sight. Security camera footage, timestamps. 9:32 a.m., my parents exiting the store. Nearly half an hour later, Mason brought into the security office. Then the medical report. When the prosecutor read Dr. David's words aloud, the child exhibited signs of acute anxiety and disrupted sleep patterns following the incident. I felt Ethan's hand tighten on my arm. Behind me, Mason leaned closer to him. Across the room, my mother turned her face away. My father didn't move. His jaw locked. The judge nodded when the prosecutor finished. Do the defendants wish to make a statement? My father stood. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Mason. His voice came out flat, almost bored. We didn't intend to harm the boy. We believed he needed to learn independence. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement. No remorse. Just justification. And in that moment, something inside me settled, because I realized I didn't need them to admit anything. They were showing everyone exactly who they were, out loud, on record, without shame. Frank glanced at me. He didn't need to speak. This was enough. The judge called a brief recess to deliberate. Ethan took Mason into the hallway and bought him a small milk carton from a vending machine. I stayed seated, staring at the empty bench where the judge had been. An hour ago, half the people in this room believed I was betraying my family. Now, no one would meet my eyes. When the judge returned, the room stood. She adjusted her glasses and read the ruling slowly. The court finds that the actions of the defendants constitute a serious administrative violation in the care of a minor. Each word landed like a weight. Both defendants are ordered to pay a civil fine of $2,000 each. They are required to complete mandatory child safety and psychological education programs within 60 days. My mother's shoulders sagged. For the next 18 months, the defendants are prohibited from being alone with any minor, including their grandson, without supervision by a legal parent. Silence. No gasps, no applause. Just stillness. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I exhaled. One long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding since the phone rang in that conference room 4 years ago. Frank placed a hand on my shoulder. It's done, he said quietly. Across the room, my father stood first and walked out. My mother followed, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, never once looking in my direction. The relatives trailed behind them, heads down, faces flushed, shame heavy in their posture. No one apologized. But no one accused me again either. I turned to Mason. He was holding the milk carton with both hands, a small smile tugging at his lips. Soft, tentative, but real. It was the first honest smile I'd seen from him since the supermarket. And in that moment, I knew something important. This wasn't about winning. It was about letting my son see that when someone hurts you, even if they share your blood, there are consequences. The drive home from the courthouse was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that feels earned after a long day. This was heavier than that, like everyone in the car was holding something fragile and didn't trust their voice not to shatter it. Mason sat in the back seat, forehead pressed to the window, watching the world slide past without really seeing it. Ethan drove with both hands tight on the wheel, jaw clenched, eyes forward. I stared at the road too, but my mind wasn't there. It was still in that courtroom, still hearing my father say, we believed he needed independence. Still watching my mother turn away instead of looking at her grandson when the evidence was read out loud. Still feeling the moment when my family, every single one of them, realized the story they'd been telling themselves no longer held up. When we got home, Mason went straight to his room without being told. Ethan followed a few minutes later, sat with him, talked about school and video games like this had been any other Thursday. I stayed in the kitchen. I made tea I didn't drink. I leaned against the counter and let the weight finally settle. Because now that the courtroom doors were closed, the real aftermath began. That night, Mason asked a question he hadn't asked before. "Mom?" he said quietly as I tucked him in. "Yes, baby?" "Did I do something wrong?" My chest cracked. I sat on the edge of his bed, brushed his hair back, and shook my head. "No, you did everything right." He hesitated, then whispered, "Then why were Grandma and Grandpa mad?" I searched for words that wouldn't poison him with adult bitterness, but also wouldn't lie. "They weren't mad at you," I said slowly. "They were mad because they didn't want to admit they made a mistake." Mason thought about that. Then he nodded, like something clicked. "Oh," he said, "that's silly." I smiled, even though my eyes burned. "Yes," I said softly, "it is." For the first time in weeks, he slept through the night. No crying. No jolting awake. Just steady, even breaths. It didn't erase what happened, but it told me healing had started. The weeks after the trial were strange. No more angry calls. No more messages filled with accusations. The silence from my extended family was almost louder than their outrage had been. When holidays came around, invitations stopped arriving. Group chats went quiet. Photos appeared on social media of gatherings we weren't included in. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel rejected. I felt free. My parents didn't reach out right away. When they did, it wasn't dramatic. No yelling. No demands. Just short, careful calls. "How is Mason?" my mother asked once, her voice unsteady. "He's doing better," I replied. There was a pause. "Can we see him?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked Mason later that night, gently, without pressure. "How would you feel about seeing Grandma and Grandpa if Mom or Ethan stayed with you the whole time?" He thought for a long moment. Then he said, "Only if they don't leave me." "I promise," I said, "I won't." The first visit was awkward. My parents sat stiffly on opposite ends of the couch like strangers in someone else's house. My father barely spoke. My mother kept wringing her hands. Mason stayed glued to my side. And then, finally, my mother did something she hadn't done in 4 years. She looked at my son. "I'm sorry," she said, voice breaking. "I scared you. That was wrong." Mason didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You shouldn't do that to kids." She nodded, tears slipping down her face. "You're right." That was all. No speeches. No excuses. Just truth. After they left, Ethan asked me quietly, "Do you forgive them?" I didn't answer. Because forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's something you grow into, or don't. And I'm still growing. What I do know is this. I didn't take my parents to court to hurt them. I did it because silence would have taught my son the wrong lesson. Silence would have told him that fear is something you swallow to keep adults comfortable. That love means accepting harm. That family gets a free pass. And I refuse to pass that lesson down. Some scars don't disappear, but they can become boundaries. And boundaries are how you protect the people you love most. 4 years have passed. Mason is 11 now. He's taller than he was back then, his voice sometimes cracking when he laughs. He's quieter, more thoughtful. He notices things most kids his age don't. Who stands too close, which exits are open, how long it takes for someone to come back when they say, "Wait here." Some people might call that maturity. I call it the mark of a lesson learned too early. In the first 2 years after the trial, my parents didn't really change. Not at their core. They completed the mandatory programs, attended the counseling sessions, paid the fines. But they treated it all like a box to check, not a reckoning. There were no angry rants anymore, but there was still defensiveness hiding behind politeness. Then something shifted. Maybe it was the counseling. Maybe it was the quiet distance from relatives who no longer rushed to defend them. Or maybe it was realizing that for the first time in their lives, no one was on their side. Not because I poisoned the family, but because the truth had been spoken where it couldn't be twisted. Their calls became softer, slower. Instead of telling me what they believed, they started asking questions. How is Mason doing in school? What does he like now? Is he still afraid of loud places? I didn't answer everything. I answered enough. Visits became occasional. Holidays, birthdays, always supervised, always short, always on Mason's terms. If he wanted to leave early, we left. If he didn't want a hug, no one forced it. And something important happened in those visits. They apologized. Not once. Not dramatically. But again and again, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with tears they didn't know how to control. They apologized to Mason. They apologized to me. They asked, quietly, almost fearfully, if I could forgive them. And every time, I gave them the same answer. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. Because forgiveness isn't owed. It's earned over time through consistency, humility, and respect for boundaries. And maybe one day I'll say the words. Or maybe I won't. What matters is this. Mason feels safe. That night in the supermarket doesn't define him anymore, but it shaped him. He still remembers it. He's told me so. But now, when he remembers, he doesn't remember being alone. He remembers the security guard who sat with him, the woman who gave him the stuffed bear, the moment I ran through that door and dropped to my knees. He remembers that when something bad happened, someone came. That's the story I want him to carry forward. Not that adults always do the right thing, but that when they don't, you are allowed to speak up. You are allowed to protect yourself, even if the people you're standing up to are family. So now I'll ask you, because this story doesn't end in a courtroom. Was I wrong for taking my parents to court to protect my child? Was I wrong for later allowing supervised visits even after everything? Some people say family should be forgiven no matter what. I believe family should be held to the highest standard. Tell me what you think. And if this story made you stop and reflect, even for a moment, thank you for staying until the end.